The River Roeburn is in the north edge of the Forest of Bowland area of outstanding natural beauty. It runs down from Mallardale Fell, down through Robendale, and then it joins the Wenning just near Ray, and then it flows on from the Wenning into the Lune. And River Roeburn is a flash flood river. This means that the river rises very quickly. Sometimes it's come up 1.5 meters in depth in probably just about an hour's time. So this very fast runoff from the upper fells means that it's potentially damaging undercuts banks. It flooded Ray with a big Ray flood in 1967, and it causes many other problems down the river. I will tell you the story of two streams, following a journey up Lanehaw Gill and down Warmbeck Gill. And then briefly we'll look at other areas in the Roeburn catchment that may be contributing to this flash flooding.
Coming out of the Roeburn, going up towards Back Farm, it used to have a quite suitable pools for spawning the sea trout and the brown trout, so it's a common sight to see the fish coming up here in the late autumn. This was washed away with the main flood. And now we have this stream running right through the middle of the field, going down to the river. This was gouged out when the flood occurred. Scattered big boulders over most of the field. This area of the stream still within Miller Paddock. You can see here the shale that's been washed down and the stones that have been washed down from higher up the stream. The stream comes up from Miller Paddock. See the undercutting of the banks. Some of the big stones that have been washed down. When the banks get undercut, this causes a weakness and eventually ends up to a landslide. And the landslide then brings big trees down. So these big trees now are waiting for the next large flood, and they may be washed down into the river. We have another area that's been undercut. There's a clay slipping. Becoming liquid. And then under the bank, the shale being washed away, leaving a big shale bank. On top of the shale bank is a big tree that will soon fall. This big alder tree has recently come down, bringing down a whole load of bank. It could easily block the river, the stream, and cause more flooding. I'm amazed how many trees have slipped down here since I last visited, about 3 months ago. Hardly any of these trees had come down by then. So this is very recent activity, very bad erosion, deep gully formation. It's hidden from our eyes, so we don't see it. And most people think these streams are very happy and there's no problems. But this is what's happening, hidden away in the woodland. What is difficult to see is how far these landslips, or how far up the slope they affect. This one almost seems to go up to the fence line to the field. And so if this all slips, all these trees that you can see here will come down in one large slip, and that will be enough to dam up a big base of this stream. When that dam breaks, it will cause bad flooding downstream. As soon as we come out of the woodland, there's a slight slippage to one side, and then as we move up further, it looks like a fairly stable stream bed. With a new bridge I'm standing on. Going up above the bridge, we can see the gorse, and the gorse helps stabilise the bank, and coming out through the gorse are some trees, hawthorn trees that are coming out through it. So this has helped stabilise this whole area. But we're still getting enough water running down here to cause the undercutting down in the bottom in the woodland, where most of the damage occurs. At this point the gully is around about 30 metres wide and probably 20 metres deep, and yet just above the gorse is an area where in previous years was a takeoff back in the the quarry closed in the 1920s, early 1920, and this was an inlet for the quarry. So there's a stream which went from here right down to the Backsbottom quarry. This is now way above the existing stream level, so that erosion has happened in 100 years, that sort of order of magnitude. So it's a recent erosion, not long term. The pipe that's come under the road here was put into a different angle than the original stream. This contributed to undercutting this bank and causing it to landslip, so it's still unstable, this bank is. Higher up on Whitmore, this is an area that was gripped, that means ditches, drainage ditches put in the 1950s. These were government subsidised to try and make this land more fertile. But what's happened with these is it gives fast runoff, which causes the erosion lower down. Also with this area, another problem is to do with overgrazing. This area was overgrazed almost certainly because of the government grants on headage subsidy. So the number of sheep you had, the more money you got. So many farmers around here put on a lot more sheep than their land could carry and damage the land in the process. So we have here mosses just trying to recover some of the bare areas, peat. Fast areas that are run off. A fairly degraded landscape. This water will run off here very quickly and it has no holding capacity. An area like this, which was bare, and it's just the mosses are now coming in to help protect it. An area like this will dry out fully in the summer. So in the dry times, when land is very dry, it's a bit like a hot plate. And if you put cold water on it, the water runs off very quickly. And basically this is what happens when we have a very big storm onto warm ground. Particularly, you get very cold water, rain coming from the top of big storm clouds. And this is what causes the damage. When the river runs a dark colour, a lot of that's due to the peat. And this is the sort of area that peat is coming from. Bare areas of peat wash away, they lock up. It's in areas where this carbon is released and lost, So actually we're losing carbon as well from the landscape. Going back quite a long time, we don't know how long, this area would have all been forested, and at that time it would have held a lot more water. One possible solution for this area is to put in heather bales. These would have the heather seed in them, and use these as small check dams, so they'd hold the water more in the landscape. This has been done up in the Peak district and is very, very successful at regenerating the heather and getting the moorland back to a state where it can hold the water and prevent flash flooding. Now almost at the top of the catchment area for this piece of land and for the stream that goes between Back and Little Scar. But even at this level we can see where the water levels get high enough to undercut the peat. So we've still got erosion occurring in this area, and with bare peat banks. I'm now within about 30 metres of the top of the catchment area. In this area you can see the lines of grips that have been put in here. Lichens growing on Whitmore in an area that hasn't been grazed very hard. We've also got bilberry coming up through it, heathers growing here, and the mosses. Cranberry is another plant that grows in this area as well. And we've also got quite a lot of cotton grass on this area. So this is an area that, because of its clumping nature, will hold water, and the mosses will also hold more water. So it's good conditions. Beginning to get more back to the blanket bog, which was originally on this area. And now at the upper part of the middle area of Whitmore. See here the difference between one side of the fence and the other. So with less grazing pressure we get the clumps appearing. These clumps with mosses, with cotton grass, all help to hold the moisture, hold the water in the landscape and prevent fast runoff. This area is an area that, looking back at the old photographs of this area, the old aerial photographs, it may have been in a fire. At that time it was eroding very badly and probably contributed to the main erosion that's occurred in Warmbeck and Gill. Where rushes occur, they also help to slow down the water flow and prevent erosion. And here you can see the mosses coming in amongst the rushes. The mosses holding water, and the rushes acting like a filter, slowing the water dramatically. Here in the middle of the rushes is an area where the water has gone down deeper. This is the first nick point where it's started to erode. "15 feet lower than that first point where there's a deeper stream. I'm now standing 3 feet deep into this stream. You can see here the undercut banks of the peat and the water running much lower down. Here we have overhang of the stream. This is an area that will keep eroding unless we can still slow the water down. And here we have a drop going off the edge of this gully. It drops down. This area here, we're now just at the bottom of that little waterfall. You can see here the peat overhang. Here's a large lump of peat that's dropped down very recently. This peat overhang is about 6 foot now, and even since I last came here, we've had quite a bit of fall off these banks, particularly up at this higher end. If we look on further down the valley, we can see the deep erosion, the shale sides, the landslips. With an area like this, Warmbeck Gill, we need to ask ourselves, what's the history of this place? What caused this damage? Where did it come from? What time in history was the damage done? Some of this damage may have been caused by a fire upstream. Some may have been due to heavy grazing. Another contributing factor, often we find eroded areas just below pipe work, where a pipe's been put in the stream's been held back, and this often causes erosion and undercutting below it. Another initiator of erosion can be putting in tracks into the landscape, and where these tracks run off, where the water collects on them and then runs down a steep area, it causes erosion. Warmbeck Gill ends up down in Winder Wood. See some new planting helping to protect the sides. In Winder Wood there's still undercutting of the banks.
Further up Robindale, there's an area where there's deep gully coming down from Mallardale Fell. This is an area where there was probably a fire, possibly a fire, sometime in the 1950s, and then there was more erosion when the Ray flood occurred. This area is still fairly bare of vegetation, and some areas where there's strong erosion still occurring on the sides of the gully. This area would be good to protect. One of the things with this area would be to fence it off from the sheep, to stop the sheep tracks causing more erosion and their grazing pressure on the vegetation. Ideally this area should become much more of a blanket bog, with heathers, possibly even bringing in some trees, some of the willows, rowan and other trees into this area to help slow the water down. And down in the gully itself, check dams would be a good thing to put in, slowing the water down. Another area that feeds into the Roeburn is off Burnmoor. One area there's two areas we've seen on Burnmoor where the peat is eroding quite badly. These areas are ones where the erosion is causing small gulling at the moment with the peat, but this certainly contributes a lot to the discoloration of the River Roeburn. Again, this may be an area where we could consider bringing the sheep off an area. Further down Roeburn, there is erosion on the side of Roeburn Woods SSSI. Here the bank was undercut with the Ray flood in 1967, and this has been continuing to have undercut ever since.
We're now further down the river at an area where during the Ray flood there was a big dam of trees. You can see in the distance here the trees that have built up recently, and at the time of the Ray flood this was about 15 feet high, and the rocks in the distance, the flood waters went over the top of it, to give you some idea of how much power there is. And just the trees that fall down in the gill build up slowly down the river, and then they cause more catastrophic flooding down below. Downstream, near the Roeburn Scar, this area here used to be a conifer woodland. The river's now changed course completely. The conifer woodland has gone. This happened at the same time as Ray flood. The big boulders that you see here all came down with the flood. This big boulder here, which is about 6 foot high and 8 foot long, is one that has come about 400 yards down the river. So that's the sort of force that the river can have when it's in full flood. So let's try and prevent this from happening again by looking after the top of the fell.
Further on down, there's some erosion just above Ray. Huntsgill Beck is another area where there's been some damage this last year. Some reason or other the stream flooded quite badly and undercut the bridge just before it reached the Roeburn. This would have been costly to repair, and also some more damage was done to the Roeburn itself. Decking was undercut just as it enters into the village. With the change in climate and the likelihood of more floods and a combination of drought and then heavy rain, this erosion problem is going to get worse. So maybe now is the time that we should act and start to repair the damage that's been done higher up on the fells. The benefits of restoring the Roeburn will be widespread, not just within the river from the fish point of view, but downstream all will obtain benefit. So let us take action now to safeguard its future.